Welcome to Travel Italia, the show about travel in Italy. Hi, welcome to Travel Italia, the show all about traveling in Italy. I'm Catherine, your host. Today we'll be talking about an important topic for those of you planning a trip to Italy, that is car rental versus train travel. Should you rent a car in Italy or should you travel by train? Lots of people have asked me this question. Over the years, I've helped lots of people plan their trips to Italy, and nearly every one of them has wrestled with this question. So, which is better, car rental or train travel? Let's dive into the details. So, in order to decide whether or not you should rent a car or travel by train, we need to think about two very important questions. The first question is obviously, where are you going? If you're only visiting some of Italy's big cities like Rome, Florence, and Naples, then you absolutely should not drive. Let me tell you why. These cities are some of the biggest in Italy and obviously the oldest in Europe. They were not designed for car traffic, and consequently, their streets are a tangled web of confusion. The city layout and traffic makes LA, which is where I grew up, look like a walk in the park. Being from Southern California, I can tell you that LA traffic is nothing compared to the streets of Rome. It's just craziness on another level. The other issue is that, not only are the streets confusing, parking is very limited and difficult to find. Free parking is rare. And in some areas, you have to reserve a parking space before you even arrive because demand is high, which is what we had to do when we recently traveled to Florence. We drove there, but before arriving, I had to reserve a parking space. And obviously, it wasn't free. The other downside is that larger Italian cities have what's called a ZTL zone. ZTL stands for Zona Traffico Limitato, which in English means limited traffic zone. These ZTL zones are in the heart of the city's historic center, and they're designed to lessen traffic and reduce parking problems. And basically, they are trying to encourage people to take public transportation, ride their bikes, or walk. Therefore, only the locals or local business owners drive in these zones. There is usually signage that warns you that you're about to enter a ZTL zone. But of course, if you don't speak or read the language, you may have no idea that you're about to enter the ZTL zone. If you accidentally enter a ZTL zone and you do realize it, maybe you're able to read a little Italian, you see the sign and you think, I've just entered where I'm not supposed to be. You can pay a small fee. Typically, it's around €5 a day, and the fee goes to the city, and it's usually payable online. But if you don't realize it and don't pay that daily fee to the city, you'll get a nice ticket in the form of an extra charge from the car rental company on your credit card, or even a notice in the mail. The tickets for driving in a ZTL zone and not paying are about 30 to 50 euros. So it's not a hefty fee, but you don't want that kind of surprise after your fantastic trip to Italy. So if you're only visiting big cities, it's much better to stick to train travel. You can get to and from these cities easily by train, and most big Italian cities have their train station within walking distance to the historic city centers. And if not walking distance, then maybe a short bus ride or a cab ride to the historic city center. For example, in Florence, when you take the train into Florence, you can get off the train and walk right into the heart of Florence, which is only a 10, maybe 15-minute walk. I never timed it, but I've done that many times. On the other hand, if your dream Italian vacation is all about driving through wine country in, say, Piedmont, or driving around the island of Sicily, then yes, renting a car makes sense. It makes sense because there are areas, obviously, of the country that are difficult to reach by train, and maybe the public transportation overall is not so great in that area. So renting a car gives you freedom to be where you want to be, when you want to be there. The second question we need to answer when trying to decide between a car and train travel is, are you a nervous driver? Or are you an adventurous person who takes things in stride? This is an important thing to consider. Driving in Italy can be very stressful. I say this as an expat who grew up in Southern California and who is used to intense traffic. Now, when you're driving in another country and don't speak or read the language, you can get yourself into some trouble. And that certainly elevates your stress level. For example, I'm from the West Coast, where, like most of America, the streets are wide. Highways are 3 to 4 lanes wide, and there's a nice cushy space between you and the driver in the next lane, or you and the buildings or the pedestrians along the road. But in Italy, most streets were designed for horses, so streets are much narrower, and even the lanes are narrower because cars are smaller. Not only are the streets narrower, but in many places there are no shoulders on the road or even sidewalks for pedestrians. So as you're driving, you have to be very careful. I'll tell you a story about a time when my husband and I were driving through a town in northern Italy called Tirano, which is on the Swiss border. We had just come back from a lovely day trip to Switzerland by car, and we were looking for a specific restaurant and following Google Map directions. And Google Maps took us down a road that was so narrow that we had to fold in the side mirrors of the car in order to get down this road. Had I put my hand out the window, I could have easily touched the buildings that we were passing. It was that narrow. Just a little stressful, right? Now we can look back at that moment and we laugh and giggle about it. But at the time, we were inches away from scraping up the sides of our car. So things like that are what make driving in Italy a real challenge. Another downside of renting a car, like I mentioned earlier, is the language barrier. You can easily get in trouble without realizing. It's not uncommon for people to get tickets for speeding, or, for example, driving in a bus taxi lane because they didn't realize that they couldn't read the sign. It was confusing. But also keep in mind that in Italy, unlike places where I'm from in California, for example, the CHP sits on the side of the road and they try to catch people speeding. In Italy, it's all done by camera. So you're not going to see a camera and be able to slow down as you pass, unless you have the GPS or certain apps that warn you of an upcoming camera. There's no way to avoid it or see it in advance. There are cameras everywhere monitoring traffic and enforcing laws. So keep that in mind. So maybe you're saying to yourself, well, that's no big deal. I don't mind all those downsides you mentioned. It's all part of the experience, right? Well, to you, I say go for it. Rent a car and explore those hard to reach corners of Italy. Have fun. But for those of you who prefer to avoid additional stress during your vacation, I recommend sticking with train travel. Train travel in general is good and it's cheap in Italy. And in fact, the farther you travel north, the better the public transportation is. The Italian railway system offers service to most of the country. You also have the option of traveling between some cities by high speed or bullet trains, which makes your travel time shorter. So it's cheap, it's comfortable, and I think it's relaxing. What are the downsides? Well, let's talk about the downsides. The downsides are things like train delays, which unfortunately are common when you're using the regional trains. So you have two types of trains: regional trains, which are the normal everyday trains, and high-speed trains, okay, or bullet trains. So keep in mind the two different types of trains. So you have less delays when you're using high-speed trains, which because they're more expensive and they try to run those on time as much as possible. Also, from time to time, there are train strikes. So if you happen to book a ticket during a strike, you are out of luck. Strikes usually happen on either Fridays or on Mondays, which is really convenient for those train workers. So I would say delays and strikes are the two major downsides. And of course, traveling by train limits you to towns where there is a train station. In the show notes, I'll put a link to trenitalia.com, which is the official website for the National Train Service. I know there are lots of third-party websites that sell Italian train tickets. And these third-party websites charge you a fee, but really there's no need to use these sites because you can easily navigate Trenitalia by choosing English as the language when you visit the website and just go about making your transaction. You'll save money by going directly to Trenitalia. So look for that website in the show notes. So in conclusion, the question of car rental versus train travel really depends on your plans and the level of adventure or stress you would like to experience. In the show notes, like I said, I'll put the link for Trenitalia, and I'll also add a link to my new YouTube channel to a video that will show you how to buy train tickets online. It's a tutorial that I did for train travel between Milan and Venice. So thanks for listening. I really hope this was helpful. If it was, subscribe and rate the show. Until next time, buon viaggio.